So, we're going to take some time today to talk about a concept called attunement. And so, at the most basic foundation, we are attuning to each other perpetually. We're in constant attunement because attunement is based off of frequency and sound waves. So, when I think of attunement, how I like to work with it is this idea of if I imagine my hand's a tuning fork and I hit it, are vibrational waves that through sound or music, like 444 hertz, or music notes A and C, that vibrate off so that we can hear. But the thing with sound waves that's fascinating is just because we can hear them doesn't mean we can see them. And that's like most spectrums, even spectrums of light. We know animals can see with radar vision at night and see things that we miss. So, very much attunement has to do with our perception and how we're able to attune not just to musical notes or have resonance with cool musical artists we like or sound, but rather attunement with another human. So often, attachment and attunement go hand in hand. An attachment is the vibrational, embodied, physical connection of often a child and their caregiver that takes place in utero, that takes place over time, that very much has to do with the central nervous system. So, our nervous system has two components: the sympathetic, which is fight, freeze, flee, sometimes fawn, and the parasympathetic, like a parachute coming down. And attachment theory is really important. It's all about our ability to express a need and have that need met. And when that doesn't happen, we can develop certain patterns of avoiding relationship, certain patterns of feeling anxious when we don't get what we need and we asked for it. And then we're very pushy for that person, or a combination of both, where I'm avoiding you because I didn't get what I need and I'm a little scared, and I'm attaching to you. So avoidant attachment. And of course, there's other categories. But today, as we think about attunement, how it's been primarily explored in Western psychology is looking at the two tuning forks that are human. And so today, I am extending an invitation to open up our mindset and our consciousness. And I love the definition of consciousness as just awareness, simple awareness. And in many Tibetan or Buddhist or Eastern traditions, when we think about definitions of consciousness, it's simply our five senses. It's really simple. So, how can we use our five senses that are highly intelligent to attune to both humans and non humans? And so, you might be thinking, non humans, aliens, UAPs? What do we got? I mean, it all is a potential. As academics, as scientists, we're good at what we do when we're curious. We're good at what we do when we have both an open intellect and an open heart. So, with attachment, the invitation is to extend that to non human relationships. And so, by that, the first area I mean is with nature, right? How do we attune to Earth, which has its own frequencies, its own vibrations that we can measure through scientific tools? How do we attune with her, with him, with it? So, as we work with this concept of attunement, then we're looking at certain vibrational places where we can read those attunements. So, in historical texts, these places are called dragon lines. I just want to pause with that. What's a dragon line? It's such a beautiful concept. It feels so mythical. And so, dragon lines is a concept that in the earth, there are certain magnetic pools that we can measure through dowsing or other techniques where there's higher energetic volume on certain earth spots. And when we think about it through more of geology or geographic lens, that makes complete sense. We have tectonic plates pulling apart, we have tectonic plates pushing together. And so we can attune to Earth also as a form of healing, not just human on human. And that can also happen with animals. Canine research is a great place to look at some of the attunement with other non-human species as well as horses. And what we know is with animals is we co-regulate. Our nervous systems link up together, and then we're better able to release connective hormones like oxytocin. So, in the field of psychology counseling, it's important we start to widen how we do mental health, which, in my perspective, is full body health: your mind, your spirit, your soma, and your ancestry. So, there are certain geographic places that, in my lived experience, have a very heavy tone to them. I've shared before that I once dated somebody in Kansas, and I was staying there meeting their family the first time, and I just, got up and went for a run, and as I was running, I just got these feelings of dread, and I was all of a sudden scared midday at, 10:30 in the morning, and I'm like, "What is this feeling?" So I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna attune to a tree. I'm gonna attune to nature and get that calm vibration." And I go to attune to the tree, and it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. It wasn't the attunement of that nature space was not healed. It wasn't at my vibrational frequency. And then I noticed the fear just kept pulling up. And so I sat and I closed my eyes. And normally, when I close my eyes, I get a lot of neutrality. I'm a meditator, so it's pretty neutral when I enter my inner world. No, I started seeing visually bodies of people, bodies of human, and I thought, this is so odd. I'm really scared of the trees. This river just looks aggressive in how it's moving. And when I close my eyes, that's the imagery I'm getting. Five senses, consciousness. So I get a little scared and I run all the way back really fast to um, where I'm staying. And I get there and I look at the person and I'm like, I had a very strange run. And my partner was like, well, where did you run? And I was like, along that woods, open creek. And they were like, oh, yeah, that was a Civil War battleground. And I was like, yeah, I could have told you that because of attunement. And I do think that attunement and consciousness go hand in hand in that the more we are open to higher frequencies and subtle perceptions, the more we're able to pick up on or be alerted through our sensory system and our perception what is happening around us. So I do think it's important to note that there are places that we really can attune to, land that is healed, land that doesn't have that colonial memory. And there are places that are really, really high vibrational where the land is quite living as much as a person. And so you can dance with the clouds. You can be swung side to side with the rain and the mountains, and it is living. And when we start to survey or read a lot of text outside of Western psychology, Western epistemology, and epistemology just means frames of reality. What frame do you project or imply on a reality that's often culturally rooted or dependent? So when we start to look at other traditions around the world that are much older than us, what we find is that many tribal nations, many indigenous people see land as the same as kin to human. So this does create an opening for attunement where if I don't have my actual mother physically embodied, maybe I go to Mother Earth. So techniques like grounding or grounding in are quite literal. And seeing the brother as your lake or seeing the lake as you is completely appropriate. But when we look at modern psychology, the ways that we've applied attunement are very speciest of just one-on-one how we heal together, how we grow. So, in this concept of attunement, I am encouraging us as therapists, healers, individuals who are interested in self-study, self-realization, to yes, attune to each other and notice how we can release oxytocin or we can feel more whole in the presence of a loved one. But the same thing with nature. And the same thing with our ancestors. And when we look at ancestry, it may be bloodline, but it can also be more expansive than that. So I also think it's important to name that we have non-human ancestors. It could be ancestors from the stars, as an example. This is starseed counseling. In the I Ching, one of the classic medical texts, it talks a lot about how the ancestors and higher spirits actually are in the Milky Way. And so if we want to connect to these higher benevolent spirits, we go into the cosmos, we go into nature. And so there are even certain Qigong practices, and Qi is life force, that we move into through meditation and mindful movement, where we call in our ancestors. So we can be from the stars, it can be a cosmology, as well as non-human ancestors, such as tree as an ancestor. And especially for individuals who have been on the land, like a given land, for 500 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, there's a very intimate connection with where you're born and a very intimate connection with where your lineage comes from. I know that in a lot of Celtic traditions, they actually would inscribe languages on trees and had a full dictionary of just different types of tree species and the language of that tree, just as well documented as any other language that was human, but alongside of trees. And many Celtic spiritual communities also had to go in hiding with colonization that took place from other neighboring territories. And what went into hiding was attunement with nature or attunement with trees. And so, in addition to this non human connection that could be stars, nature, or even animals, and then, of course, that takes us to our spiritual lineage, which I would say is the third one. So, if we maybe were born Buddhist, then Buddha might be an ancestor for us we work with. Or maybe it's JC, Jesus Christ, somebody you're like, yeah, this is part of my spiritual lineage. And so, we're working with these ascended masters and beautiful radiant spirits, whether we call them saints or angels, but they're part of our cultural spiritual beliefs. They're also really important to work with. And then lastly is going to be our genetic ancestors. So these are the 4 areas that I like to use when I'm framing what is attunement and what is ancestral work and healing. So ancestral work is super important because we carry a lineage within us, whether that's karmic memory, if we're basing that frame in more of a Vedic philosophy, or if it's an issue that sometimes we can't fix or heal. The number one question is, does it belong to me? And if it doesn't, then karmically speaking, I can't change someone else's destiny or karma. That wouldn't be respectful. But I can give it a place, set it down, and return it to the ancestor and call in support for that. So I can return it. I can love it. I can give it a place. But the most beautiful thing we can do with it is transmute it. I once shared this with a client, and she was telling me how much really heavy things had happened in this person's life. And at the end of each thing, something beautiful came out the other side that was not that initial trauma, pain, suffering, negativity. And so after hearing this repeated, and I see this with many of my clients, I said, "You're a transmuter." And this person laughed. A transformer? Like big transformer. And I thought, like maybe that too. Maybe we do reinvent ourselves and transform into something different. But this really gets us into the alchemy of working with our ancestors and working with land spirits and the elemental spirits like water or metal or air as living beings and respecting it as such, even if our science is slow to adopt that. And it's like, okay, well, let's take it from a cultural perspective or an anthropological perspective. And in the fields of therapy, how we work is we work with cultural humility, which means I don't know. I'm humble to your way of being. I am like a little tiny piece of sand in this huge foot of the ocean. Of course, I don't think I understand your culture, your way of being, your frame on life, but I'm open to it. So, having global perspectives is a really important piece and aspect of multiculturalism. And so, I see this work of attunement and widening it to ancestors and land very much a piece of our multicultural work. So, with that said, I guess the question I have is what are you not seeing? Because you're seeing what you're seeing. How does consciousness get limited? As if you had a headlamp, and so you can't see what's happening in the rest of the forest. You can only see what's happening right here. And just so I'm clear, that came from a student. My students are my greatest teachers, right, of this metaphor of the lamp. What am I not seeing? So that's my question for you is what are you not seeing? Because you're seeing what you're seeing. And what in your life right now feels like it's Pam, come in on your plate, or bam, just kind of hitting you in the side of the face unexpectedly, of feelings, emotions, hard things, suffering that has the potential to be transmuted. And so when I say transmuted, another question might be, what is transmutation? And what is alchemy? Like if we start to work with definitions. So when we look at transmutation, I really think of the elements. Can you dissolve something in water, like salt, and then it becomes another substance that wasn't there before? Or when we're putting our hard, big emotions that have energetic weight, can we bury it? And then over time, when we bury something, it rots, decomposes, and then it becomes renewable energy. So, really, transmutation is how can you take this huge energetic weight and transform it through you into something clean, pure, something that wasn't there before. And of course, nobody can do that until they're ready. And you can't jump over or bypass your suffering. We have to feel it. We have to go into the emotion, let it pour through us, whether that's tears in the closet or on the floor, or weeps or sighs or groans. We have to let it flow through with the intention of making it renewable energy. And when we do that at an ancestral level, there's also gifts to be ascertained. So we talk a lot about historical trauma, suffering, and so important we talk about these things. And some of my writing on attunement, I focus on my experiences just really studying genocide. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't a topic in my field, but in my field of awareness, but it is. And where I grew up, there was a ton of unmarked graves and a lot of genocide due to colonial rule. So I say all of this because I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about genocide. And then it's like heavy. It's like, oh, this is where I leave. But the more we work through it, kind of like yin and yang or two coins or two sides of one coin, it's still one coin. The heaviness, the darkness, the suffering, the pain, the horror, and the joy, and the survivorship, and the making it through, and the reality that you exist. Earmuffs, if you need them, if there's children around. Holy shit, you exist. Wow. Wow. Like, think about your whole genetic ancestry or even being human. It's like you could have gotten eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. They used to do hunting in caves. I mean, that's wild. That's wild to think about hunting and fighting a saber-toothed tiger. And then it's wild to think about the greedy land grabs of colonial rule or the psychology of manifest destiny of God sent me to enslave, and harm everybody. It's like, really interesting. That's wild. And somehow we lived through it. Even if we came out biracial or mixed or any side of the spectrum, we came through. So there is a celebration of survivorship. Yeah. And gifts if you're willing to go through the fire, if you're willing to go through the suffering, there are gifts from my perspective. And of course, everyone gets their perspective, and there's no one right or wrong way. As we move up through these layers of consciousness, we actually move from negativity and positivity we move into neutrality. And once we start to push that upper limit of consciousness, it's like, oh, life is just unfolding. And this is exciting. And our attachments to the outcomes of our healing start to soften. I'm not trying to fix or change. Rather, I'm just noticing. And I understand there's a paradox here of the world is burning, and I'm saying, I'm not trying to fix or change anything. Because I have trust in a bigger system that doesn't involve me. And so there is this allowing, and that's different than institutional nihilism. We're being like, institution, I don't even know what that means. I'm checking out. What's the purpose of being here? Neutrality is different than that, because the next step of neutrality is a willingness to engage, a willingness to follow one's passion or love in the world. So it's taking action without adding anything like projections or outcomes or expectations. It's taking action and then just allowing. We call that wu wei, the Taoist path, the flow. And in ancient Taoism, the attunement was done through nature. So this idea of the therapist would be the tree. The idea of the therapist would be watching the season shift, of learning how, I'm looking out a window right now, it's quite beautiful, how the fall leaves are changing from green to yellow. And as I'm staring out the window right now, I see a leaf fall. And so much wisdom in that teacher of letting go. Chlorophyll, drying up, moving on. And then when that leaf falls, it actually returns to the ground, decomposes, and nourishes. It gives us life to nourish the entire system again. So I'm like, wow, what a teacher of contemplation. What a teacher of just simply observing nature. So very much so, nature is the therapist. I once did an interview for like a magazine on mental health, and they were really excited to promote Myers-Briggs personality. That was cool, like any type of self-awareness I'm game for. However, I was like, well, I think Myers-Briggs is cool, but it really comes from Vedic astrology and Carl Jung's work. And I really just think that nature's the therapist. And they were like, no, can you talk about Myers-Briggs? And I was like, it's really just the tree. It's really just the leaf. And they're like, but how will people know how to connect to their personality? Go outside. And then shortly after that, they interviewed someone else for the article. And I think I got cited at the bottom. But there is a real truth to this, that our culture's like, no, the system of psychology. Really? You think Myers-Briggs knows more than the ocean? So let's pause there. And this is just a really warm, gentle introduction to both attuning to ancestors and land spirits, which includes all the elements and all the globe. And then just this frame that I'm offering. Whether you're somebody that is doing therapy or just in your own self-discovery, this frame of ancestors having 4 parts that exist in the collective unconscious of our psyche is quite important. Do you remember what they are? Star ancestors, land, animal, and animal and then can be one, but really star, land, animal, non-human is that bucket, lineage, and then your genetic ancestors. And as we talked about, working through the genetic lines is really important for finding your own clarity and your own gifts. And there are protocols and models that have been researched and that are used throughout many different cultures of how we do that. And often it's ritual and ceremony. So I hope those 4 frames for expanding your healing and your view of self as an interconnected being to a matrix is helpful. And I'll just invite you to tune in and see if there's any questions that come up. And just a reminder that your questions, within them, there are no right or wrong. Just feel how relieving that is. It's like, simply just here learning, discovering, and curious. How do you know when you've connected to an ancestor? Here's my follow-up question. How do you know when you're in love? What are the signs of that? And it could be with like maybe a niece or a nephew, like a little baby you're holding for the first time, or a friendship, or a lover. Like, how do you know when you're in that frequency and vibration of love? How do you know? And just let that sit because it's going to be different for all of us. It might be sweaty palms. It might be a fast heart rate. It could be a smell. It could be that you feel the oxytocin just relaxing you. It could be the draw towards cuddling or connection. It could be any of these markers. But notice how most of the things that when we prompt that question to each other, what comes up is it's not intellectual. It's not or maybe it is for you, but I would say this is not love. Maybe it's not like how their CV looks or what their resume is like or how much is in their bank account. You're like, I love you now. I don't think it's those intellectual things or something that you can see on paper. It's very felt, it's sensory. So, in the same way that we have sensory input, is how we know that we're connecting with things that have frequency, resonance, consciousness, but may not have a body. One example for me was when I was younger. I can remember growing up as Catholic and visiting a tabernacle. And we had this really cool cultural tradition where we would go to 3 to 5 different churches at midnight. And there would just be candles lit everywhere. And I can remember visiting this last little church near midnight, all the candles lit. And it was really special, that place, because it was where my family had grew up and spent a lot of time. But I can remember getting to the tabernacle or just kind of the Eucharist and just feeling this sense in my heart like someone had a magnet and was just pulling me towards something. Like that very visceral pull to come home, where it had a magnetic quality. So imagine like two really strong magnets on your fridge. I was like, whoa, I'm being pulled. And it was just this yearning. So we can think too as some of these deities, helpers, Holy Spirit, as ancestors as well. The lineage ancestors, our spirituality. So I can remember what that felt like in my body. It was just a strong magnetic pull towards that presence. But know that there's a hierarchy, like most things. And just because you are a spirit doesn't mean you have high consciousness. And just because you are an ancestor doesn't mean you're healed. When we look at something like genocide, pow, think about how many humans and their spirits, if you ascribe to transpersonal frame, just got jetted out of their body without appropriate crossing over. That would leave soul parts, that would leave very undigested ancestors and just people. And so the few times when I've been at places like Holocaust museums or aspects like that, it has a visceral quality to me that is very undigested and very nauseating and very intense in how it smells, because there is potentially, maybe not in my ancestry, but there are spirits who haven't fully crossed. And so that kind of gets to the difference between, at least in some Chinese medicine texts or old philosophical texts, the difference between a ghost and the difference between a spirit. A spirit often is higher vibrational, more aware of itself, where a ghost is very unaware of itself, but just is suffering and hasn't fully crossed over its consciousness. So, how do we know if we're meeting an ancestor? Like I said, in my experience, it's often a very beautiful, kind pool. And then if there are ancestors that maybe were slaves or had really horrific lives or immigration or early death, that doesn't genetically just get swept under the rug. It's with us still. And so we talk about things like epigenetics and how if Holocaust survivors, even within one generation, the chemicals and the hormonal makeups that mothers are passing on to their children or parents are passing on to their children is significant. So actually, those children are often born with lower levels of cortisol. People think they'll be higher. It just completely depletes it. So these things we're talking about have epigenetic markers we can test and notice and look at, but also if we're in a culture, an epistemology, or a context that considers spirituality and consciousness, then you betcha they're also going to have these imprints spiritually. And it's beautiful because in one of the classic books that I really love, the I Ching, it talks a lot about, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but this concept of spiritual inheritance. And can we pass that down to our children, not just bank accounts and kind of empty money? Because it's like, how much virtue, how much ethics, how much connection to wide spirit and consciousness and wisdom are you passing down? And whether that's passing down behaviorally, mimicking certain patterns, or whether that's genetically passing on vibrations of peace, or whether it's spiritually, less karma that the future generations have to pick up and clear or deal with. So I often think of family systems work kind of like a rug, that if you sweep it under the rug, it just gets bumpy for all the other generations, and then someone trips. So even if you die and you're like, I was greedy and I stole things and I don't know, I was an influencer and you did all these things that were cool. It's like, yeah, but like what lumpy rug did you leave for those after you? And so in a way, it's like, I'd rather have zero karma when I leave, or no desire or peace if I'm leaving anything, versus leaving all of the remnants of greed to deal with, or malice. So yeah, people talk about net worth. What a concept of the Western mind. Oh, someone once asked me what my net worth was. Curious question at a party. I know. And I really just sat with it and I took a few breaths, like I'm going to take now. I swallowed, I digested the question. $1 billion in stars that are my ancestors that take form, assets that go deeper and deeper and deeper than any skyscraper you could ever imagine, that are found in the roots of trees, aspen systems. My material wealth is the song of my ancestors that echoes across the galaxy. My gold lives in my kidneys, and the amount of turquoise and jade I have stashed in caves lives in this heart. Let's not promote that concept, right? This idea that somehow your worth is tied to a matrix or a system of green paper that was cut down from my brother's back. Yes, please take care of your basic needs and don't buy into bullshit. So may you know your true net worth. All the fish in the sea that can't even fit in a net. Lower consciousness, right? And we can kind of get sucked down or pulled into these stories that my value is what I look like. It's this illusion of money that doesn't even exist for most of the world. Attune to something real. And you know you're attuning to something real when you get that magnetic pull for God, that magnetic pull for universe, for great mystery, whatever God is for you, even if it's dog. You're like, I got the pull towards dog. Spelled backwards? Great. And if you're atheist, great. Then the pull to the void of curiosity, of the unknown. Love it. But I just invite and encourage some authenticity and attunement. And so, as we talked before, society right now is really in a sea of mud. We have so much mud, at least in my version of society. There's mud. There's this great turning of soil. Mindfulness are really key ingredients, slowing ourselves down, mindful speech, breathing, hitting the pause button on life before we get reactive to an email, a text that says, are you available now? I noticed in my inbox today, I got like 4 emails that were all like immediate attention, action required. And I was like, our culture is sneaky. creating this like energy underneath the tone or underneath the word of rushing, of nowness, when none of that stuff is actually nowness. Unless you're having a heart attack and we need to get to the ER, it's not nowness. So we need to widen ourselves so we have space to think, to react with love, or rather respond with love and not even react. So the mindfulness of self-compassion, non-reactivity are like the foundations of this self-study. And then once that's met, then we start to outcrop of attunement and moving beyond attachment as just with other humans, but with nature, with the ocean, and moving into activations. And so these become these beautiful flower petals that all happen to start with the word A that are blooming. So excited for you to bloom and to get a little taste of peace in a world that claims chaos for you or claims rushing, and just blooming even if there's mud all over the floor. I love that question. Discernment. And then what am I personally here to transmute? And how do I surf waves of chaos? A few questions in there. We surf waves of chaos with compassion. That's the only way to surf. And when you're surfing, have you ever surfed? Same. I hadn't surfed, and then I had this experience where a dear friend was teaching me how to surf. And earmuffs again, you eat shit. You literally get like tossed by a wave, and you have salt in your nose and in your lungs, and you're kind of coughing, and everyone else is surfing around you, and you're like, I'm okay. Ugh. And sometimes it even feels like a wave can like, or your board can just knock the air out of you. Oof. So when we surf waves of chaos, a key ingredient is compassion to ourselves and compassion to that part that feels chaotic, that part that feels hurt, that part that just got slapped by a wave. And it's like, hey, that part is hard. And it's also seeing that particle or that droplet of water in its context of a larger ocean. So it's like you get to see that piece of chaos, and it's real and it's valuable. And it might even be connected to an inner child who needs your attention or an aspect that needs love. And then we honor the entirety of you, which is also the water. So I think when we're surfing chaos and sometimes piles of shit, that too, it's with compassion. Key ingredient in allowing things to emerge. But your question on discernment is of key importance. So discernment is our ability to move at a pace that's appropriate for our intellectual, our cognitive, our physical, and our spiritual level. So in the same way, I wouldn't ask a 3-year-old to cook dinner and pick out the menu and drive to the grocery store. I wouldn't force or ask myself or anyone else to do things that they're not ready to do. And so as a collective, I do think, I project that we haven't in the field of counseling and psychology, because we're so young, early 1900s, late 1800s at best, when we have systems from ancient India that are 3,000 years old, or ancient China that are potentially 7,000 years old. We're young in this frame of consciousness. And so discernment is simply, I take a step when my entire system feels ready to take a step into connecting with an ancestor. And developmentally, we need guides, right? With a 3-year-old, it's like, hey, little one, I see that you're struggling to put on your shoe. Can I help you? Can I show you how to tie the shoe? So having a guide, having a companion help you figure out how to connect to ancestors is appropriate if it's brand new for you. So it's a lot of working with that part or that aspect with compassion, and really trusting your somatic system to tell you, I'm ready to discern, I'm ready to dive deeper, or I'm not ready. And I sense right now that there is this collective readiness. it is as if all of the shared collective shadows are emerging, or collective shared potentials in this reality grid are really coming up to the surface to be seen. And the more we're able, even with the scariest of ghosts, to love them, to offer a flower, to offer seeing the world through their eyes with compassion and healthy boundaries, the more those things dissolve or dissipate. So, in the question of what is mine to transmute, I often think whatever comes into my perception, there's a piece of it for me. And on certain levels of consciousness, all is one. We're all interconnected in these big ways, huge ways. And so I'm at a place where I see you, I see you, I see you, and I go, that's me too. And so when you do well, I'm like, I'm doing so well. And when you hurt, I go, I'm hurting too. Because it's almost this fine line of insanity where I'm giggling to death at how fun this reality is, that grass exists, that leaves turn yellow. Why yellow and not blue? And they fall to the ground. Whew. It's giggly joy of this is so fun, and nothing is serious. And at the same time, it is the exact same coin of pure suffering and sadness of there are children starving for food, and I have, and they don't. And when we feel into that, I have and you do not, and we really sit with that, it hurts. It has to hurt if we're really in it. So it is this edge. It's walking an edge of consciousness of this is all very serious, and suffering hurts. And I will cry for weeks in this hole. And at the same time, I will laugh and giggle until I cry out of joy. So it's just this edge we walk with consciousness where all realities are true, and the discernment of knowing when to ask for help and knowing when we're ready on our own to spread those wings and fly. Or in the case of this metaphor of Starseed council or support system from the stars, the council, we're ready to fly, and we know when that is. You are deeply supported. You're deeply supported. All right. Well, I look forward to chatting with y'all later, and we'll talk some more about activations. Yay. So, how instead of just tuning to each other, we can take that a step up, and we can merge with water and Great Spirit. We can merge with fire. We can merge with each other. So, activations, upcoming conversation points. And I'm also going to do a talk on how to read your own Vedic astrology chart, also called Jyotish. And we're going to go over the 28 stars. And so if you're wondering, what are my ancestors, or what's a roadmap I can use? Let's look at where your star clan is from based on the moment that you incarnated in this earth, and what energetic imprints were you gifted with.